I am tired. And that's why I need to talk to y'all about depression. About a year ago, I was living in London for about 6 months, and towards the end of my stay, I got the chance to visit with my friend Harry from the YouTube channel Harry's Moving Castle. We've done some work together before on his channel, and he's a really great creator, and you should just check him out. And we had a really good time. We went on a small pub crawl and had maybe one too many pints, and when we walked over Waterloo Bridge and just looked at the London skyline, we had to stop for a moment and say, God, isn't it just beautiful? And it was beautiful. At least, I knew it was supposed to be beautiful. We were in the most majestic city in the world, after all. But the thing about depression is that it's like seeing the world in black and white when everyone is telling you that it's full of color. You can call the London skyline all the words you want. Beautiful, majestic, all the things we know it's supposed to be just as a matter of fact. But when you can't feel any of that in your blood and guts, then what use are words to you? You know, my guy Nietzsche said something about that in a lesser-known essay called The Pathos of Truth. We always think about words as tools of meaning-making, of giving names and descriptions to the things around us so that we have some way of navigating the world, but Nietzsche actually thought that words had the opposite effect, that they obscured rather than clarified our world. A word can capture, maybe, the image of a thing. The word elephant can be taken to mean a giant gray, leathery animal with a trunk and floppy ears, but be careful not to confuse the word elephant with the actual thing. The word on its own is meaningless. The word isn't even tangible, it's just a sound that evaporates on the wind. The word elephant can never have the same weight, the same realness as a 2-ton gargantuan beast staring you right in the face. And if you make your entire life project trying to understand the elephant by words only, by facts that you can abstract from the thing, then you can share that truth with others and become immortal, in a sense. But eternal life isn't really a life at all, because our lives aren't eternal. The world of truth and facts is just a world of abstractions, and the more you attach yourself to it, the more you damn yourself to obliteration as you slip further and further away from reality. And that's what depression feels like to me. It's experiencing the world from behind a pane of glass, fogged up by abstractions of what you think life is supposed to be like, but never being able to experience those things yourself. That glass becomes your disconnect, and you become a spectator of your own life, powerless to actually make changes and navigate the world the way that you want to. Words have their utility, but when it comes to living a life, they're useless. And I know that's extremely ironic, coming from the Reality Weasel, a personality who's made his bread and butter on long and extremely wordy essays on the importance of discourse and the sanctity of truth, but that's just it. The Reality Weasel really is nothing but his words. The Reality Weasel can't feel depressed or alienated because he has no life in which to be depressed and no friends to feel alienated from. But that just can't be true, can it? My life, before I became the Reality Weasel, really wasn't that far off from what I projected onto my internet personality, but it was a life. A human life. I had a pretty normal childhood. I made friends and got to do normal kid things, and normal teenager things when I got to that age. And yet, my life wasn't quite normal in comparison to the vast majority of Americans. I wasn't obscenely wealthy, but I came from upper middle class, very educated parents. I wasn't a genius by any stretch, but even I could tell from a young age that I just had a better knack for thinking and processing information. I grew up to be a very high-achieving student, and I thrived in the high-pressure environment of a widely renowned public high school that has a reputation for attracting the cream of the crop. Some eggheads who just grind for grades, sure, but also future scientists and engineers and artists and musicians and filmmakers and writers. The bulk of the student body didn't have that kind of go-getter quality, but I certainly did. I was always in the top tier of my class, I had already swept state science fairs, I had already sung at Carnegie Hall, I could already write better than most undergraduates, and it was pretty clear from the off that I was going to get an elite education when I went to college. Yeah, I won't make any bones about it, everyone knew it. I knew it, my parents knew it, My friends knew it. My mentors knew it. A lot of my teachers told me I was going to go far in my intellectual life. A handful of them basically promised me greatness in our last days together before I graduated. They said I was going to make waves and change things in the world, and to a certain extent, yeah, I think I've fulfilled that promise as a rising scientist. But the thing is that for a long time, after I got to college, that was all I cared about. I got lost in my books and my writing trying to figure it all out. Not just science, but politics and society and human nature and life. I lived in a world of words because that was how I had always gotten people to like me. It was how I got the adulation of my parents, the admiration of my teachers, and the approval of the prestigious college where I found myself surrounded by people who could write me into a corner with the kind of knowledge they had. And so I wanted to be on the right side of everything, distinguished as most educated among my peers, trying to arrive at the destiny that had been promised me because I thought that was where the joy of life could be found. That was why I used to lend so much credence to the Enlightenment. There was something so beautiful and pure to me about the great philosophers that I aspired to be like. Voltaire sitting in a French salon, Newton with his eyes turned towards the heavens, Locke and Rousseau planting ideas that would explode into rifle blasts and banners flying in the wind. Ideas we simply take for granted as the eternal bedrock of our world. There is a reason we call it the classical era, after all. But the Enlightenment was, in the end, just a moment in history like any other. It had its shortcomings, like any other. And for all the vibrance it gave us in science and art and politics, it loved to flatten human spirits. It loved to flatten difference and oddities and the quirks of culture in favor of a universal, reasoned, natural law. And it's no surprise that the British Empire arose out of this. We live now in modernity with an 18th century assumption that knowledge is the way to the good life. That the more knowledge you have, the more ennobled and enriched your inner life is, and the more of the world you are. It's the phantom that creeps unseen, unknowingly holding the hand of every upper-middle-class American, whispering unheard in the ear of every high-achieving teenager, writing the mission statement of every pressure-cooker high school before pen is even put to paper, breathing the air of distinction that permeates elite universities like the one I attended, all the while tearing us apart with guilt and self-hatred when we fall even a little short of that idealized image of ourselves. And at the end of it all, as I find myself at the end of my undergraduate years and on the threshold of life, I wonder, what was it all worth? Because after a while, that kind of life becomes incredibly alienating. The truth is, most people don't really care about pursuits of the mind. They don't live in a world of words. Provided they're financially stable enough to do so, they live for comfort, for fun, for thrills, for good food and good drink and good sex, for togetherness, especially for togetherness. So maybe you don't really care about the nature of Homo sapiens or how to organize societies to maximize human flourishing, but damn if you didn't love belting out that Ariana Grande song with your friends at the club. Even writing that, I picked up a whiff of old smugness there, but I'm really not trying to look down on popular culture here. In fact, I might be doing the opposite in my own weird way. Because I see the way people sing along to songs on the radio, the way they dance with each other, and I see joy. I see something primal, the way people are brought together and the way they do it so passionately. I don't get it. The music is not for me, I find it vapid and grating on the ears, but the people who do like it don't need to explain to me why they like it. No, I can just see it in their faces. It stirs something visceral in them, something immediate and fleeting, and that's what makes it exciting. It's the joy of being alive, a joy that can't be captured in words, and it's a joy that brings people together because everyone in the room can feel it. It's an easy joy, as easy as just letting go. At the end of the day, people don't like to be challenged. We're naturally averse to confrontation, and we like things that make us feel good. We like people that make us feel good. And a wise man once told me that the way to make people feel good is to make something they simply can't live without. Learn how to carve tables, or hew diamonds, or repair a car. Or do something human, be charismatic because people love charisma. Lead people because people need to be led. Make them feel valued as part of a larger goal because people need to feel important. But here's the thing. Being pushed for 22 years to unlock the secrets of the universe doesn't teach you any of that. Being raised on Mozart and Kubrick and Dostoevsky and learning to fetishize high culture doesn't teach you any of that. Being part of an enlightened intellectual class doesn't teach you any of that. If anything, it makes you more introverted because you learn to engage with things and ideas and you get trapped in your own head instead of engaging with actual people. And even if you manage to break out of it, 22 years later, all you're left with is nothing. You don't know how to live with other people because you were never living life to begin with. You were never of the world. And so there you are, alone, and grasping for some kind of meaningful connection. And what's my point? Why all this about depression? Well, what if it isn't just me? What if I'm just a drop in an ocean of lost souls? What if I'm just one in this giant class of people who were placed on a pedestal in this new age of information? And what if it's baked into the way we structure our education system and our job market? Because here's the thing, higher education used to be the privilege of the select few who could afford it. For decades, a high school diploma was all you needed to make a decent living for yourself. But then the GI Bill saw a massive influx of World War II veterans into American colleges, a lot of those colleges being the old money elites like Harvard and Yale, some of them the newer liberal arts elite like Reed, but most of them were the state universities that still bear the lasting legacy of being massive student repositories. So, when everybody's getting educated, then there's more college degrees floating around in the world, and that means they stop being as special as they used to be. Suddenly, the bachelor's degree becomes the baseline requirement for employment, so you have to send your kids to college if they want to get a job at all. And they have to send their kids to college, and the bubble keeps growing and the degree becomes more inflated. Everybody can go to college, but now you need some extra qualification to put yourself over the top with employers. So you need to start going to the best schools, to Harvard or Stanford or MIT. And that means you need to beef up your resume from a young age. It's not enough to be decent, you need to be the best, and chances are you're only going to get that way if you're raised that way. Raised to value knowledge as an end in itself. And if you need to see the pathologies of knowledge obsession, then look no further than me, and all my peers, and the fact that 1 in 3 college students now deals with some form of anxiety or depression. And now consider the other side of that coin. The people who are being displaced by automation, and by the people who are smart enough to program and fix the automatons. Marx worried about worker exploitation in the 19th century. Maybe we should be worried about worker obsolescence in the 21st. The intelligence barrier for entry into the workforce is getting higher, and the unfortunate reality is that some people just aren't born with the brainpower to put them over the top. No job means no money. No money means no chance of starting a family, or having the means to enjoy the pleasures of life with your friends. And it certainly means that you will never run in the same circle, or have the same experience, or connect over the same life as the people like me from the class of the literati. We are breeding an entire society that is, from the time of birth, doomed to disconnection and meaninglessness. What if the new division between humanity is no longer wealth or race, but intellect? What if we produce a world of people who can't hew diamonds, or build tables, or fix cars? What if the world I live in now, with the people who raised me in it, and the people I grew up with in it, and the people I worked with in it, what if we all live and die separated from the world, and from life? Perhaps our greatest curse is that we truly are a wretched race of animal, meant to take our first breaths, breed, and then die in the same Pleistocene wasteland that graced the eyes of our equally wretched ancestors. But we took ourselves out of our natural habitat and placed ourselves in zoos for the entertainment of others. We ogle our heroes and our philosophers as though they were spectacles, but be wary of wishing that people would do the same for you. Such a life leaves us all trapped in cages. I just couldn't see it when I was younger. For all the time I spent critiquing intersectionality and modern-day moralism and partisan politics, maybe the problem I saw as the existential threat to our society was just a symptom of something far more sinister and far more powerful lurking underneath. Maybe our politics aren't causing our desolation, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe social justice isn't the manifest evil of the American left, but a hyper-educated intellectual class looking to anchor itself in the real world through some warped version of humanism, constructed the only way they know how, with models and classifications. Maybe Trumpism isn't the ignorance of the unwashed masses, but the crying out of an entire economic and social underclass looking for guidance. And maybe the alt-right is only a resurgence of racial radicalism and Nazi atrocities on the surface, but underneath, maybe it's a movement worried about the collapse of an older system of meaning-making in a modern, multicultural world. Politics isn't the real fight. It's always been much, much deeper than that. And until we get that deeper problem sorted out within ourselves, then our lives are going to be at the mercy of our politics. Forever. But the problem with our social commentary now is that it hasn't washed its hands of this fight yet. To them, politics is the fight, the only one that has any bearing on the meaning of our lives. They're addicted to watching political gladiators hack at each other for sport, but can't see how we're being crushed under the weight of our own fathomless emptiness, the pit that has been dug out of our souls. They need bodies, but they don't want to see people because that would force them to admit that we don't exist to be expendable soldiers for a narrative, for mere words. The real fight is much bigger than any political grievance. The fight is in ourselves, and the same collapse of meaning that we feel is being felt society-wide, as large as every institution of education and high-level thinking, and as small as the life of one person. As small as me. We need a new class of critic. We need someone who sees this problem for what it is, and who can tell people suffering like I did that it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe that person will be me. Maybe I can actually do some good in this world and share all the wisdom I've gained in my short life and try to help some young people out of the intellectualism trap that sucked the life out of me for 22 years. Maybe. There's no guarantee that I'll gain any kind of traction. It's difficult not only to have meaningful conversations, but to have conversations about meaning, because it's not a concept we get taught from a young age. I think some of us have an intuitive sense of what it means for something to be meaningful, but it's so often couched in moral or religious or philosophical terms that a lot of people might think of it as some pie-in-the-sky ideal, which doesn't exactly have traction in a reductionist modern world. We simply aren't used to thinking about meaning as a necessary component of life, like food or shelter. The climb towards having that conversation gets even steeper when trying to place it in a societal context because we generally don't think on a society-wide level. We often take our immediate surroundings for granted and more often than not find them pleasant or at the very least tolerable. So when someone comes to you saying that you're secretly miserable and that society is actually coming apart at the seams, it'll sound like you've just completely lost it. But I do think we need to have a different way to talk about knowledge and meaning and what it means to live the good life. Maybe it's too late for us, but I have the hope that the next generation can learn from our mistakes. I do feel like that is what life is calling me to do. And that's why I refuse to be the reality weasel anymore. That's why I'm washing my hands of all of it. This partisan blood sport, this persona, all of it. I am so tired of this fight. Of this life that was forced upon me and the exceptionalism that I was expected to live up to. I need space to be human. And so perhaps it's no coincidence that the moment I let go of that life, and that belief that I was exceptional, was the moment when I realized that life could be so much more. I came home from college for Christmas break, and I had what was maybe the worst night of my life. I had what amounted to a 4-hour panic attack on Christmas night because I had no guarantee that I was going to get a job as a scientific researcher, and if I didn't, then that would mean I had failed everyone who had ever taught me, who had ever believed in me, who had ever sunk endless amounts of money into my education. It would mean that my destiny had all been a lie. It would mean that I was just an unextraordinary human being, and that I would never have an important life, or an interesting life. It would mean that I could never be happy. And that was the most terrifying thought I've ever had. It was the peak of every neurotic bout of self-hatred I had dealt with since I was a teenager. And that was the moment it broke me. That was the moment when I realized that living life like this was untenable, and I needed to make a change. Now. So, with 4 hours of sleep and a splitting headache and on the verge of passing out, I stepped outside, and I took a walk as the sun finally dipped over the horizon. I looked up towards the dimming evening sky, flat and ashen, without a glow to be seen. I was painfully aware of my body's rhythm, my feet plodding heavy on the grass. And there was a glare of streetlights, the hiss of cars passing on the road, and moisture in the air so thick that you could scoop it with a finger. The world was so much smaller than the London skyline that had graced my sight all those months before. All these things so banal and ordinary. And maybe ordinary was okay. Maybe this was all life needed to be. Sights, sounds, sensations. And you know what? That evening sky was indigo. And those traffic lights were red. I see the world in color now. And maybe that means I can help others see it too. Down in the cold, 'cause you're dreaming of them Saturdays that came before, and now you're stumbling onto the hard Saturday night.